What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of my favorite Conquest matches from this season. We're going to take a look at two different matches, both of which are up against GALACTUS, and I had a pretty good feeling I was playing up against a GALACTUS deck when I saw Selene from this opponent, which is typically really only played in GALACTUS decks. And when my opponent snaps here to Project Pegasus, that's a pretty good indication that GALACTUS is going to come down at that center location. And I did realize that, but I thought for some reason I wouldn't want to play Sera in my GALACTUS location because I'm going to need all four of the spots at that location. What I didn't think about is without Sera, it's actually a lot more difficult for me to get access to all four slots because my opponent is going to goblin me. That's what they threw that Selene buff on. If I had Sera at the location, I could use a cheap Odin to send that green goblin back and probably actually get the best of my opponent. I could have actually even gone turn 3 Mystique, copying the Sera so I could play Odin on turn 4, but now instead I'm just not going to have the time to do it. I'm realizing even if I play Odin on the final turn, my opponent gets to play something this turn and something next turn, so I'm just going to skip and see if my opponent is willing to give me any more information. Unfortunately, not going to be able to win this one. My opponent is going to get away with these first two cubes here. They don't actually have anything that exciting Electro, but like I was saying, if I were just to play Odin on this final turn, even if I had played Silver Surfer last turn, it wouldn't have been enough because the Green Goblin would have stayed on my side of the board, and there's a number of ways that my opponent could just go over the top of me here, unfortunately. So that is going to be a 2-cube loss to start off the video, but these are, like I said, my most, or maybe I didn't say this, these are my favorite Conquest games that I've played this season. I was looking and I wanted to present my favorite Conquest games for a YouTube video, and I realized my two favorite Conquest games were both up against GALACTUS. So both of these are really fun, and this game I'm feeling a lot better. I think Nor Dimension gives me a ton of ways to manipulate my energy. If I can get out an early Sera and know that GALACTUS is coming, potentially, I think I can have much better odds to take my opponent out. Nowhere is not a great location for this deck. This deck relies heavily on reveal abilities, but it's also a terrible location for GALACTUS, so maybe that's fine. And I'm just going to play Hazmat on turn 2. That's going to allow me to play a turn 3 Jhin and get Sera out there on turn 4, which I think is going to be super important. And we will see my opponent already has a Jhin, so they could start to get up to some crazy shenanigans already. On turn 2, they're going to play their Demon from the Hood, and I believe they're also going to play a Jhin. So they will have 2 more Jhins in their hand, and they will have 5 energy this turn. There's a bunch that they can do with that 5 energy. We are just going to have to play the Jhin into Nor Dimension still, because Sanctum Sanctorum is location number 3. Pretty awkward location. Both of us played to Nor Dimension early because we wanted those Jhins, which means neither of us have played to Sanctum Sanctorum, and that is obviously not a good GALACTUS location. That is going to stop my opponent. They are able to send me a Hobgoblin over in Nor Dimension while we still have some space there, though. But space is at a premium this game, which does mean the goblins are going to also be at a premium themselves. However, with 6 energy this turn, I'm not going to go for Sera. I'm actually going to play Odin, the turn 4 Odin. That's what I was looking for the previous game. We're going to send that Hobgoblin back, assuming my opponent does not play and fill Nor Dimension this turn. Hobgoblin will fill it for them, which I think is a pretty good getcha. They're just going to run out some Jhins and a Black Widow doing nothing, and now they're only going to be able to make one more play for the rest of the game here. Meanwhile, we still have 3 open slots to their 1, and we are winning in Nor Dimension by a pretty considerable amount. in a game that is likely to go to differential too, because we have tied in Sanctum Sanctorum, assuming no Jeff or other weird cards that you don't typically see in a Galactus deck, so I don't really think I have to worry about those too much. I think this turn, I could play Sera. I don't really have any great 3-cost cards. I could still just play Mystique into nowhere just as like a random 3-cost card, but then it's only getting +2. So like Absorbing Man might be just the most stats that I can get, and then hope to draw Luke Cage or something. Nothing here is super impressive. I think Sera or Absorbing Man into nowhere are probably the right call, and then just look to play Silver Surfer next turn. But nothing is like super impressive here. I don't think it really matters at the same time, and ultimately I just decide to play a Jin. I don't really even know why I played that, to be totally honest, because I didn't need more room in my hand. But regardless, doesn't matter. My opponent retreated, spent a whole bunch of time thinking about something that does not matter, and now we are on to game 3, and I believe this game starts off with a snap from my opponent right on turn 1. Okay, not on turn 1. Maybe it takes them until turn 3 to snap. I'm not sure. Or maybe they snap to this. Black Vortex is a pretty crazy location. No, looks like they are not going to snap just yet, but they're going to wind up snapping next turn. Black Vortex, a pretty rare location too. I'm not like super familiar with it. The first card you play here becomes a random 6-cost card, and here is the snap from my opponent with the Nexus as our 3rd location. I'm going to drop Sebastian Shaw and stay in it. Seabass in the Nexus seems like a really good way to get a bunch of power to all 3 locations, but Electro into Black Vortex is really good until my opponent hits Ultron, filling up all of those side lanes for my opponent, and that is going to be really awkward. So I immediately snap back during the Ultron animation there. And Magik is even a cherry on top, because my opponent might stay in it here thinking 29 power in Nidavellir is reasonable. However, with Magik, I'm going to take that down to just 9 power, so that is going to significantly take away what my opponent is doing, and they're going to stay in it despite this snap. They're going to send over a Green Goblin, so they do have a way to get a little bit more power on the board, but it is not looking great for them, I have to say. And now with Limbo, we have the full ability to take advantage of these final 3 turns of the game, where my opponent only has 2 remaining spots for these final 3 turns. So kind of awkward. They are definitely in a pickle here, to say the least. We're going to drop Sera into Limbo, and my opponent is going to play in Alioth on turn 5. Remember, they have an extra energy from Electro, and also these games are from a little bit ago. This game was played before the nerf to Alioth, so that could have got me. That would have destroyed my Sera, but I played it to a side location, and that's kind of what I was hinting at during the first game of this video. I just didn't want to get into all of that right up at the top. Just going to rewind for a second to make all the points that I wanted to. While these games were played a little bit ago, the beginning of this season, Toxic Surfer has not changed since the beginning of this season, and even at the end of last season. This deck has remained the same, so this content is a little bit old, but I definitely still recommend this deck, and I'm having a ton of fun with it. And right now, my opponent is kind of at an impossible spot, because either they play a card into their final space on the board this turn, or if they don't, we can use Hazmat, get the Black Vortex out of the way, and then use Odin to send the Green Goblin back to my opponent's side of the board. So that's exactly what I'm going to try to do here. Now, my opponent does make a play, and it's actually pretty good for me that the Hazmat turns into Hulk, because if I had double activated it, my opponent is playing Annihilus this turn. They could have given me back all of those drones, which would have been absolutely terrible. Instead, I just have to deal with my opponent having 1 additional space open here in the Nexus. And I think I should be able to beat that with Luke Cage plus Wong Silver Surfer over in Limbo. It's going to be a ton of power on that Sebastian Shaw, which unfortunately gets moved out of the location with Cannonball. So this winds up being a really, really close game because I actually lose the Nexus. However, I've got enough power in those other two locations that I'm going to grab a win in Limbo and Black Vortex despite a pretty close loss in the Nexus, and that makes for quite an exciting 8-cube finish. One more match that I want to take a look at here, and both of these matches are from Gold Conquests as well, just to add a little bit more legitimacy to those maybe. I've actually stopped playing in the Proving Grounds and Silver Conquests the past few seasons. I just get gold tickets from the collection track, and then I jump into Gold Conquests and then play a few infinite tickets as well to gain all of the rewards for the season. So yeah, all of the Conquest footage that you can find on my channel is going to either be at gold or infinite tier of those Conquest matches. Here we are throwing down a Magik, give us some flexibility despite the Avengers compound, and we've got a pretty solid hand. We've got the Brood plus Absorbing Man, which will allow us to make a bunch of broodlings, even if we don't draw Wong to make like the full combo happen. Wong is kind of the build around card in the deck, but if you don't got it, you don't got it, and you can sometimes do Silver Surfer Absorbing Man on the final turn. However, we have a different opportunity here to just turn 6, drop Silver Surfer and Sebastian Shaw, not in that order, Sebastian Shaw, then Silver Surfer, and then just Odin, the Silver Surfer, on the final turn, and that's basically the same, but with the added broodlings, we just get to spend or spread that buff around a little bit. That's going to line up perfectly for us here because we will also get to send that Hobgoblin back with Odin, a pretty familiar interaction from the previous game here. And I'm going to snap. It's a turn 6 snap. It's almost a boomer snap at this point, but I figure I'm not getting more than, after you reveal to your opponent that you have the Silver Surfer, you're definitely not getting 2 cubes out of that. So I snap on turn 6. That's at least going to get me these 2 cubes as my opponent does stay in it, and they will wind up retreating before the game is totally over, but we at least are able to take them for 1 additional cube here. But Odin into Limbo, send back that Hobgoblin, really good, and then re-trigger that Silver Surfer. That will be 6 additional power center and a whole bunch more additional power, 8 more power in the Daily Bugle. So my opponent writing on the wall there, they are going to retreat for 2 cubes, and we start off pretty well, and we would have won in Limbo as well, sending that Hobgoblin back over, assuming my opponent did not fill up that location. This game, again, we've got Brood plus Absorbing Man, and that might be something that we aim to take advantage of here again, and then Magik as well. Magik being a pretty key card for this deck, being a 3-cost card, being just 1 additional draw in all of your combo pieces for that turn 7, where the math just lines up better for you a lot of times, being able to play Silver Surfer plus Absorbing Man or Wong plus Silver Surfer on that final turn. All of that's really good. And Onslaught Citadel is a fantastic location as well, because if we can Wong in that location, we can go kind of crazy with Silver Surfer. So that is the idea. Turn 4, we do get to drop Wong into the Onslaught Citadel. The only reason not to do that is if I want to Mystique my Wong, then I might not want to play the Wong right now. Playing Wong next turn will allow me to go turn 6, Mystique plus Silver Surfer, and then turn 7, Odin in that location. So that's definitely something that I am eyeing up here. My opponent is going to play a Sentry over in Limbo. On turn 5, I briefly consider playing Absorbing Man to make some more broodlings. There's a little bit of awkwardness going on here. If my opponent has a Nihilus, they're going to take away one of the spots in the Onslaught Citadel, which is going to make my Wong a little bit worse, but I can probably still get a decent amount of value out of Wong in Onslaught Citadel. That is still a very good combination, so I'm going to go for that, and I don't draw the Mystique. But then on turn 6, initially I'm just thinking Sebastian Shaw center, Silver Surfer into Citadel. Next turn I will Odin that Silver Surfer. However, I have the read here. My opponent, this is a different opponent than the last match, of course, but I think that they are also on Galactus, partially because of the Hazmat and the Luke Cage stuff that we saw in the first game, and because of that, I'm gonna play around Galactus specifically. Longtime viewers of the channel have seen me play around unknown Galactuses before. I think it's partially because I was a Galactus one-trick previously in Marvel Snap that my Galactus star is just firing on all cylinders here, but because I'm thinking about Galactus, I'm gonna play Seabass and Silver Surfer both into the Citadel, and eventually those Silver Surfer triggers will bring Sebastian Shaw over the top, and because Galactus has destroyed Limbo, we're actually going to get my opponent for 4 cubes this game for a reverse surprise victory. I think they were hoping to grab a surprise victory against me with my Deadpool emote I threw up there, but they're going to fire it back because we were actually the ones that did the surprising on this one. We've got Brood, Mystique, Odin, and Luke Cage on this one, and again, we have Onslaught Citadel, which is a pretty great location for me, not only just because of Wong, but also because of Sera getting able to make huge discounts on Onslaught Citadel. However, this game, it's my opponent's Ravonna that is going to give my opponent some huge discounts. That's a pretty sweet play here, and unfortunately, it is going to set up for an absolutely devastating third turn of the game. There's not much I can do. I'm just going to play Sebastian Shaw into Hotel Inferno. Maybe I can make use of Silver Surfer in Bar Sinister later. Nope, not going to happen. My opponent hobgoblins me and fills that location. And while this is pretty terrible, it's not going to leave me any room to Odin those goblins back to my opponent. It also means I can't get Galactus at that location because my opponent is going to have one final hobgoblin that sticks around. So at the very least, my opponent cannot Galactus me. That probably means I can still find some interesting things to do this game. Turn 4, my opponent and I are both going to play Magik and turn those remaining 2 locations into Limbo. I wanted to have 7 turns this game. My opponent actually really appreciates being able to turn off Onslaught Citadel here because my deck has so many ways to abuse it, and my opponent isn't really using Ravonna at this point in the game. So now all I can do on turn 5 is play Hazmat plus one of my 3-cost cards, and after thinking about it for a bit, I decided to go with Luke Cage and Hazmat both center. Maybe with enough Hazmat triggers, I could do something crazy and still grab the win in Bar Sinister along with this Luke Cage. And then my opponent is going to Annihilus and clean up that Hobgoblin that they have there. It's pretty tricky though because I haven't drawn Wong, but I could maybe like Odin and then Absorbing Man or something, but it's kind of awkward to make it all work. I think my best play is probably going to be to Brood plus Silver Surfer and then Odin the Silver Surfer as well as the Hazmat. But I wasn't thinking about Galactus. This was like the most telegraphed Galactus play in the world, and after predicting the blind Galactus, to miss this one is kind of embarrassing because I just didn't even think. When my opponent played Hobgoblin in Bar Sinister on turn 3, I wrote off that location as a Galactus location completely. But then they used Annihilus to clean up that Hobgoblin, and I didn't reconsider that they could Galactus me right in my mind at all, which is going to allow my opponent to surprise me with a Galactus that is one of the most telegraphed Galactuses that I've ever seen. But unfortunately, it got me there, and yeah, sometimes you're just gonna get got. On this next game, again, we've got Brood and Absorbing Man. That's been a reasonable combo for us in the past. It allows us to get enough power at multiple locations that put us above the kind of Galactus threshold that we need to care about. So it does wind up being a pretty strong combo, and Eternity Range is also really fantastic location for us because now it means my opponent cannot Galactus me at that right location. So I snap to Eternity range. That's enough to get a retreat from my opponent because that rock really would have rocked them. So moving on to round 5, we are in high stakes mode and we've got Absorbing Man, Magik, and Mystique. There's actually one important thing that I want to talk about right here. My opponent snaps. That's actually a pretty reasonable, so from here, if I retreat, then it's 4 cubes to my opponent having 3 life left. And that basically means that we're tied, whereas if I lose this game, it's 3-3. Which again basically means that we're tied. So there's really no risk for me to stay in it here, and I think that means that my opponent doesn't actually benefit from the snap there. X-Mansion is a location that Galactus cannot play at, so that's pretty good. They will give me a Green Goblin at that location, and then we're gonna have a Titania, and they're gonna have a Sauron. I don't think that Sauron really does too much against them, though. It might turn off like Luke Cage and Ravonna, but it really doesn't hurt like their core strategy. So I don't think it is a super important deal here. And with Sebastian Shaw, that basically locks up Limbo to be another location where my opponent cannot Galactus. So things are looking pretty good for me here. They're going to send over the Void and take Titania. Well, not send over the Void, but they're going to generate the Void over in Limbo. Then I've got 5 energy this turn. We can Ironheart to pump everything, and that'll send Sebastian over the top. And if I Hazmat in that location too, then we can also block the Void from coming over. Yeah, let's do it in this order a little bit better. That might mean Seabass doesn't get the Ironheart pump, but this definitely blocks the Void and shrinks 1 less of my card, so it's fine. And now they can't Galactus me in Limbo. So feeling pretty good about our chances here with all of that. And then I draw Sera on turn 6. I'm just going to Odin, send over Green Goblin to my opponent in X-Mansion, and then they really don't... Oh yeah, Galactus. Totally forgot about Galactus twice in a row. Which, yeah, double embarrassing. Again, my opponent just coming up with I'm looking one way and they're throwing Galactus in the other way. Kind of. The last game, no real excuses for, just wasn't fully paying attention, wasn't thinking of everything. But now, it's 3 cubes a pop. So, if either of us snap, that could make this game the last game of the series. But I thought it was a nail biter, and I thought it was a fun series regardless to have the Galactus prediction, and then 2 surprise Galactuses where my opponent just kind of catches me with my planet down there. My opponent is going to snap to make this the final game, so we'll fire off the fist bump on them. But Big House is a really good location for me. I can still play anything there, could play Sebastian Shaw, however my opponent cannot play Galactus there. So I don't think I need to even play to the Big House, don't even think I need to worry about it. We're just going to play Seabass into either Throne Room or Fisk Tower. I'm initially thinking Fisk just because that's where my opponent Galactus me in the previous game. However, if I play Seabass into Throne Room, that will allow me to play all of my setup cards into Fisk Tower, and I think that might be pretty good. My opponent's going to Green Goblin me, which is again why it might have been smart to play Seabass into Fisk Tower, but I think we're still going to have enough means to do everything that I want to do here. We've got Silver Surfer, Absorbing Man, and Odin. And my top priority right now is actually just making sure I've got enough power in the tower to survive a Galactus eating me up in that location. And I think Seabass is going to have enough power over in the Throne Room to just get it done by himself. My opponent sets up with a Wong over in that location, and then on turn 5, I'm just going to go for Absorbing Man on Silver Surfer. That's going to put me up to... it's basically adding 8 power to that location. So that'll put me up to 9 over in Fisk Tower. My opponent will take a little bit of that power away from me, though, with a Hazmat in the Throne Room, I believe. We'll see that in just a second after they flip over Luke Cage. Yeah, so that's going to put me back down to 3 power in that location. However, I can still come out over the top with Odin, re-triggering Silver Surfer, actually sending the Goblin back to my opponent as well, and re-triggering the Absorbing Man, both of those pumping up the Seabass, and that power is doubled up. So that should be enough to win in the throne room, and with that is going to be enough to win the series. Can't imagine what they have here, and yeah, it's just going to be a Galactus, and that is not going to be enough, unfortunately, for my opponent. Sebastian Shaw is able to take it down for 36 power, and Galactus is going to not eat anything more in this match. That's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.